Natalie Mack is a homeschooling mom of five children who has been serving military homeschooling families for more than 2 decades. Her husband is a Navy chaplain who recently retired after 34 years of service. Through her business, Natalie Mack LLC, she offers consultations to homeschoolers. She is also the founder of the nonprofit Military Homeschoolers Association, MHA, which is an advocacy and resource support organization for military homeschoolers, which also hosts the new podcast, Base to Base Military Homeschooling. Natalie Mack, welcome to the Liberated Podcast.
Thank you so much, Kerry. I appreciate it. I'm excited to be here, and I want to say thank you for the work that you are doing in the community. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done as homeschooling continues to grow. So I really appreciate what you're doing.
Well, thank you for being here, and I am so appreciative of all of your work. We have lots to talk about, including survey data that your nonprofit has been collecting and some of the outreach work that you're doing now and that you've done over many years. But I'd love to start, if we could, Natalie, with the early days of your experience as a homeschooling mom. And you're sort of at the tail end of your
Yeah.
personal homeschooling journey. You've sent four of your five children already off to college, and your fifth child is currently a senior in high school as a
Yeah.
homeschooler. So you have so much experience as a homeschooling parent, kind of the first perspective on all of this. But love to
Yeah.
hear a little bit about what made you choose homeschooling from the beginning.
Yeah, so I love talking about this because I have had such a great experience with homeschooling. And I should say, not only myself as a mom, because moms will say, oh, it was a great experience. But a lot of times you want to know, what do the children say? What do these homeschool kids say? And they have actually said thank you, that they appreciate that the sacrifice, because I recognize it is a sacrifice, but they've said thank you. They see how it helped them, how it benefited them in their journey from homeschooling to college and graduate school and beyond. And so what got us started, gosh, um, let me reference something. I did a TEDx. It's on YouTube. It's called The Impact of Homeschooling. It really will unpack our whole journey. I think it's at 30 some thousand views now.
Wow.
And this is 2 years. So it was in April 2023 that I had the opportunity to do that. And so one of the things that we were really excited about homeschooling possibly offering was the opportunity to bond with our children.
Mm.
And I unpacked that a little bit on the TEDx and I was actually talking about an experience that we had with our youngest daughter who was in daycare with someone we trusted, someone we actually went to church with, and we were fine with her. But we noticed on Sundays, our daughter was very quick to like just want to get down out of my arms and run to this lady. And I'm like, well, that's okay because you want your child to like the babysitter, the child care provider. But I felt there was a little something extra. Like maybe there was, she knew this person maybe a little bit better than me. And that might sound really weird, but if you unpack when your child is in daycare and typically if you're working, the amount of time in the evening is very minimal that you really get to spend with your child, right? Let's assume a 9 to 5, a 9 to 6, and by the time you pick up your child, it's focusing on all the evening things that need to get done in preparation for the next day. And so I started to see this. My husband saw it, and we were like, something's not quite right with that. But we were really happy with the private Montessori school that we eventually had our children in. And so it took a little bit, but as we continued to meet homeschoolers, we continued to see what we considered fruit from homeschooling. We just knew that it was something we needed to pivot to. And so that was a few weeks before 9/11. And right around that time, we had re-entered military service. And we received orders from Maryland to Camp Pendleton in California, for those who may not know where all the military bases are. And our journey began. And so it's been an incredible journey, one that I am at the end, as you mentioned. Five children, and now this last one who's 12th grade. And I know you have a
Amazing.
12th grader, and
Yes.
It's bittersweet. It's really bittersweet. And it's one of the things I've been thinking about creating a workshop about just to help moms, particularly, right? Transition towards the end to get prepared because it's really a difficult task to help yourself like get into a space that's good. Even though, we were raising adults, we were raising them to launch to the next, what I call post-secondary destination. So it's good, but it's hard inside,
Yeah.
right? So that's one that those are some of the reasons, some of the things that my husband kind of we talked about, and so called us to, really this is where we need to go. So
So, yeah, it's just such an interesting story, Natalie, and I want to talk a little bit more about it. As I mentioned in the intro, you're the founder of the Military Homeschoolers Association
yeah,
nonprofit that supports homeschooling families.
yeah,
You do your own research and you also kind of collaborate with other researchers. I think about recent research out of the Johns Hopkins University Homeschool Hub,
yeah,
run by Professor Angela Watson, where she was able to analyze data to determine, how popular is homeschooling among military families because anecdotally, she said that we've always known that there's been a large contingent of military families homeschooling.
yeah,
She wanted to know, how exactly how many or roughly how many do the anecdotes
yeah,
reveal fact? And sure enough, that's what they found at the Homeschool Hub that there's an almost double
yeah,
rate of homeschooling
yes,
among military families
yes,
and that about 12% of active duty military respondents said their family homeschooled during the 2023 to 2024 school year. This compares to an overall US homeschooling rate of about 6%. So just tremendous amount of, again, popularity of homeschooling among military families. And when I've always thought about military families homeschooling, I guess I've always assumed, well, it's because you're moving around a lot. There's a lot of uncertainty in terms of where you'll be stationed, and homeschooling may provide that kind of continuity to not have to be pulling kids in and out of schools in different locations. But your story, I think, is really interesting because it sounds like you were already thinking about this educational option even
yeah,
before
yeah.
that. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that, and not only in kind of your own family's experience, but what you're seeing with homeschooling families.
Yes, I would love to do that. So, I really appreciate Dr. Watson's research and her advocacy and the Homeschool Hub. I had reached out to Dr. Watson a little bit over a year ago, actually, and I said, I see what you're doing, but I don't see the military homeschool discussion.
Mm,
And she said, let's talk. And so we actually got on a Zoom and met, and she said, wow, I know military families homeschool, but I really never thought about like the research for that. And so I actually was telling her that I had information from Homeschool Legal Defense Association where I work part-time also as a military outreach coordinator. And they had been able to pull from that US Census, the Household
yeah.
Pulse Survey, and actually be able to gather some data. And so I was really glad to have that opportunity to speak with her because, I know that as an advocate for military homeschoolers, sometimes we aren't in the general overall discussion about homeschooling, but like those rates, double the national average is. I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised. And you may say, well, why not? Well, I have been in the space for a long time. That's one. Secondly, I'm very active in the community as a speaker. I've traveled to Germany to support the European Homeschool Conference 2 years in a row. HSLDA supported me to attend that. So I know I'm actually on a Zoom tonight with Okinawa with 13 moms that are part of a large homeschool group on the island of Okinawa. And so I reach out and I'm in groups on social media, Facebook groups all across the large military homeschool community from Guam to Oki to Germany to Hickam and Air Force Base in Hawaii. And so over the years, from beginning leadership at Camp Pendleton, where we were new to homeschooling, and I said, I'll do field trips for our group. to over the years leading groups in Italy and starting a large group in Virginia Beach at Little Creek years ago. I've been in the space and I see what is happening. And you are right. Traditionally, military families choose to homeschool because we are always getting orders and relocating. So for continuity, consistency, our life is one big change bubble constantly. So let's find a way to help our children have some stability.
Mm.
They don't have to go into different brick and mortar schools. The teacher stays the same and all, and you can pack your curriculum up. And even Classical Conversations has jumped on
Mm.
board with CC on several military installations, even overseas. And so it makes sense from that regard. But we recently, with MHA, with support of one of our board members, Candace Guelzo, we actually met and I said, our association is for military homeschoolers. And I don't see a large database. So we need to create a survey. And so we got together, came up with 68 questions that really allowed us to dig deep into, not only what branch and what rank, but why are you homeschooling and what do you need? Like, what type of resources do you need? Why are you homeschooling? And a whole plethora of other questions. And we actually had, I think it was 861
Wow.
respondents in a matter of just under 3 weeks. We had to close it. And we knew that this was going to be phenomenal. So we ended up with, I think, 763 usable responses, meaning people
Wow.
actually completed the entire survey, right? And the data analysis took a while, and eventually, because Candace is homeschooling up at West Point, and I'm doing what I'm doing. So it took a bit, first time, but she had experience from other surveys she had created. We pull this data together and it's amazing. And so that survey is the first ever survey for military homeschoolers. And we have had data, a little data before, obviously from the census, that you can extrapolate as Dr. Watson and HSLDA has done.
Mm.
We have an organization that's called Blue Star Families. They have an annual military family lifestyle survey, so they ask a few questions about homeschooling, but nothing conclusive, nothing comprehensive. And so we knew that as a nonprofit centered and focused on this community, that we really needed this to be our first task, our first assignment, our first accomplishment, so that when we get this data, we can say, oh, you want to talk about retention, military families choosing to remain in service? There are a lot of variables, but education is a big one. And if military families feel that they can, offer homeschooling to their children, then maybe they are more likely to continue in military service. So we had some stats and data, and all of it is on our website, available under our research tab under the About Us. If you scroll down, it's a research tab there, and the survey lives there. And it's a beautiful survey, red, white, and blue. What other colors, right? And so that is kind of that evolution of what we're seeing, and a lot of the data did still show that families are still concerned about that continuity and consistency. That will not, I don't think that will ever go away. It just makes sense, right? But what else is bringing the increase? What's driving the double the national average?
Yeah.
That's the question we wanted to know. And so I had a feeling I already knew, but I needed quantitative to confirm it. And it did confirm it. Families did say literally what I was thinking. And the families that have neurodivergent children, the special needs, they don't feel like the schools are meeting them. Even DOD, which typically families
Mm.
feel like DOD, they're going to get a higher caliber of education. And I'm not here to critique DOD, or I can't speak from experience, but I can say that what families have said is that across the board, they just don't feel like their special needs children are actually getting the resources and services that they feel they need. I think a little of this probably came out of COVID, when families got to see a little bit of a peek inside of what they thought was happening and realized it wasn't quite what they wanted for their children. And then there's a lot of concern about bullying, as we know that's increased, um, and also school violence. So those were the three factors that added to the traditional reasons. I call them the new reasons. So, yeah,
Yeah, and of course, reflective of the larger US homeschooling population in many
exactly.
ways. We,
Yes.
especially newer homeschoolers,
Hmm.
not
Hmm.
being satisfied with their existing schooling options,
Hmm.
especially for neurodiverse students or those with special learning needs. And now they have other options to tap
Exactly.
into. And
Yes.
of course, for many years, the surveys that the U.S. Department of Education has done around homeschooling has found that the number one motivator for today's homeschooling families is concern about the environment of other schools, including safety, drugs, and negative peer pressure. That's
Right.
again another
Right.
reason why homeschoolers would be choosing, our families would be
Right.
choosing homeschooling, and reflected in your survey as well in terms of bullying and some of the school safety concerns that
Exactly.
families might have. So, just this is such a wonderful resource. I
Yeah.
strongly
Thank you.
recommend my listeners and viewers go to militaryhomeschoolers.org. That is the nonprofit website. And again, click under that research tab to see this beautiful annual report. One of the things that stood out to me, Natalie, is the question that you had from your members about homeschooling style. And what I love about the results here is it just shows the diversity of the different educational philosophies and approaches that
Yes.
homeschooling families are choosing.
Yes.
Eclectic, classical, Charlotte Mason, Montessori, unschooling. Did anything sort of stand out for you there, as well as how does it mesh with what you've seen over the years in terms of working with homeschooling families, what the types of educational approaches they choose?
Yeah, for the most part, it pretty much matched what I already have seen and know in my work as a consultant and my work also
Yeah.
over on the HSLDA side, getting out to the state orgs and doing speaking and conferences, talking to real homeschoolers, what curriculum are you using or helping them, when they ask, oh, I want to homeschool, but the curriculum, oh my gosh, I'm so overwhelmed, it's too much, and how do I decide? And I know that a lot of families who maybe are pivoting from a brick and mortar, no one asked that parent that question, like, what kind of curriculum do you want to use? Should we use for our child, right? They didn't get to give insight or input into that. The school district makes that decision. So for families pivoting, it can feel they can feel very intimidated by having to wade through the options. And so helping them see, wow, this is a plethora. You can
Mm,
choose. And for some families, that's overwhelming because
yeah.
they're used to being told this is what you're going to do. This is what we're using for your child. And so, but homeschooling gives you that freedom, that flexibility, right? To be able to say, well, I have a child that needs to learn this way, and I have a child that needs to learn this way. And you can figure out how to make that work. And that's one of the beauties of homeschooling. And so I didn't see anything necessarily that stood out other than just confirmation for what I'm seeing. And actually, my work directly with homeschoolers is, the variety is there. We have been, or at least I consider myself an eclectic homeschooler.
Mm,
I love curriculum and I love learning. And we always were comfortable choosing different curriculum for different children and different needs, and including the
yeah.
dual enrollment option. We have lived in different places, and that's been something we've been able to take advantage of with different children. Our oldest daughter went on a mission trip to Ukraine and came back. She was with her Navy chaplain dad and her sister years ago and came back from Ukraine, and she said, I want to learn Russian. And I talk about that to TEDx because I thought, okay, well, I speak Spanish and I've been trying to get you to learn Spanish. That's your high school foreign language, right? And she never really was interested. And so when she came back, I said, well, let's get it done. Let's find the resources. Eventually, community college was the best place for her for Russian. And
Yeah.
she excelled, and we've used that. And so a lot of families are using dual enrollment. And so yeah, the sky's the limit, and just helping families be confident to know that it's okay. You can, and if you make a decision about a curriculum that really maybe doesn't work, you're not married to it, right? You're not married to it, and so I say hold it because the next child, if you have another child, right, that might be perfect. So don't get rid of your curriculum. Just hold on to it.
So you do a lot of these consultations with homeschooling families through your LLC, your website, natalie-mac.com,
I do.
curriculum consultation being a part of that.
Yeah.
What else are you hearing from families? What do they need from you? What are they looking for when they come to you?
Yeah. Well, it just depends on where they're coming from.
Yeah.
If you have a young mom who has a preschooler and they're really wondering, okay, I think that we should homeschool, but I'm not sure. Family is, telling us, no, this is, send them to the local school down the street or, pay for a private school, whatever it is. A lot of those families are just looking for just like confidence. They're looking for encouragement. They're looking for someone to say, yeah, if that's what you want to do, you can be successful at it. So that's how I typically help those families and help them tune out the family members who are questioning, like and speaking into them, no, you're going to ruin your child, right? And
Yeah.
typically it's grandma, right, who is very lovingly concerned about her grandchildren, and she hasn't walked that journey, right? And so she really is speaking from love and concern, but she doesn't really know. And so helping them kind of lovingly tune it out and say, we'll walk alongside you and get you there. If someone's pivoting though from a brick and mortar school, then helping them get into the mindset shift, because I always advocate that homeschooling is not just an academic choice, it's a lifestyle. And so a lot of families who are pivoting from brick and mortar are seeing this. We're just replacing the academics from the brick and mortar and we're going to now homeschool. But they don't realize that homeschool flourishes best when it's a lifestyle. So we're always learning. There's learning opportunities everywhere. It's not always just the 9 to 3, have your textbooks and get it done. You're always learning. You're learning on the weekends and on the evenings. You're learning when you're going on errands and when you go on travel. You're always learning and sorry about that, and how to actually, help families understand that. So it really kind of depends. And then we have families who have been homeschooling for a while and they reach that seventh and eighth grade. They're looking ahead and they're thinking, okay, well, it has worked up to this point, but high school, I don't know. That's scary. And that's where they feel this immense responsibility that if they mess up, they have failed. And
Mm,
I get it. I get it. The reality is high school, and it is the last launching pad to the next place, right? So it does have importance. I get it. And at the same time, though, doesn't have to be as scary as it feels. And so helping parents ideally see, I use this analogy of like an artist has a blank canvas, and that's your child's high school years. And you, along with the child, can say, wow, this is a white blank canvas, but wow, it can become a beautiful like art project. It can, if you kind of use that analogy, it can become, over the years of high school, you can see, wow, you did this and you dug deep into this and you involved yourself in this and you grew this way. And so in the end, you not only have strong academics, you have all these extracurriculars that come together, and you have this amazing person that is so unique and has had the opportunity to become that way because of homeschooling. And so, yeah.
I
So you
love
see,
it.
I'm passionate about the homeschool. The high
Yeah.
school to college is, I just, we've walked it, and each child has been different in their path. We had our youngest daughter wanted to be a D1 athlete. And I'm thinking, as she mentioned that at age 7, I didn't play soccer. My husband didn't, and we didn't know like D1, we knew what it was, but we were like, how does this little kid know? And she knew. She continued to progress, and actually we went through the whole NCAA process, and I love helping families know that you don't have to pivot back to a brick and mortar if you have a college bound athlete. There's a process in place that the NCAA Eligibility Center has. You just have to follow the process, and I help them understand and walk through it. So,
And this was
yeah.
your older daughter, Natalie, or
This was our youngest daughter.
your youngest
Yeah,
daughter?
our youngest daughter. So out of the five, the
Yeah.
girls are the oldest. And so our youngest daughter was the one. We were overseas in Naples, Italy at the time that we were completing the whole NCAA eligibility process. And so I now just have taken that experience, kept up with any changes up to this point, right? And help families understand, what's the process? What do I need to do? Because I don't want them to pivot back to brick and mortar if that's
Yeah.
the only reason. I'm not anti-public school. I am pro homeschooling.
Yeah.
I will say that, but I'm not anti-public. I know not everyone can homeschool, and I want to come alongside the family and help them figure out what's going to work, what's working. If you want to homeschool, then I will help you homeschool, if you feel that it's not working for you, let's talk about why. Is there something that you can maybe tweak a bit to become, for you to feel more confident and successful. So, and you're in that process right now with
Yeah, I said that Kim Kent and Kim is the founder of Extend Homeschool Tutorial
she's so
outside of
awesome.
Washington, D.C. I absolutely love Kim, and she and I have done a four-part series of homeschooling to college because we're both currently homeschooling seniors in homeschool high school. And yeah, it's been such a learning curve and an interesting experience, but very rewarding.
Mhm.
Lots of
Mhm.
success there. What would you say, Natalie, on that topic of what should families know about kind of homeschooling to college if they are going to continue homeschooling through the high school years? What would you want them to know?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that comes to mind is that if you can establish a plan, and in doing so, establish the plan with your high schooler,
Yeah.
because this is their final 4 years. This is the opportunity for them to really begin to know who they are and what they like, and to be able to show that if they are college bound or wherever it is that they're going next. Each what I call post-secondary destination has a different requirements or different journey, different path. But the high school part is helping them figure out, okay, this is a plan. If you are planning out your ninth grade and 10th and 11th and 12th, plan it. It doesn't have to be, it's not written in stone, but it is a framework to help you know that, I need to get this many maths in because I'm going to college, and you want a strong college bound transcript. If you're looking at, okay, the social sciences, wow, that's a huge category. You can stick with traditional US history, world history and all if you want, but you can expand because you're homeschool. You can do African history. You can choose like a country in Africa. You can do French history. You can do Chinese, whatever you want. Let's figure out what the child really wants. And I think the opportunity exists to then really allow them to craft those 4 years in a way that really speaks to who they are and where they want to go. And then add in those extracurriculars. So sometimes I think we forget about those. We feel intensely, again, like I mentioned, these high school years, and it can rest really heavily on our shoulders as homeschooling parents that, we have to get it right, that we focus so much on academics. And while those are super important, um, what about the extracurriculars? And those are some of the things that I love to speak about at conferences, as well as helping attendees know, oh, that's right. Like, what else are we doing? What else is our child doing? And so, say a child has interest in environmental science, which is our youngest son. So years ago, we were at the commissary, which is our grocery store on a military base, and we have baggers that you can give a tip. So the bagger said paper or plastic, as we were at the conveyor belt and they were, scanning our groceries, it's paper or plastic. And I remember I said, oh, plastic, right? Like what else? Has the handles, easy, right? Paper bags, oh. And so I heard this gasp from my youngest son who was with me, and now he's 17. So this had to be it was about 4 or 5 years ago. And I'm like, what happened? And I turned to him. He said, Mommy, do you know where that plastic goes? And I thought, okay, is this a trick question? Like, it goes to our house and then we throw it out. We unpack the groceries and we throw it out. And he said, but it ends up, think about the ocean. And I'm like, oh, and so I'm thinking we're raising homeschoolers to think, right? And to be concerned about their community and the environment and the world. And so I didn't want to squash that. Like, I wanted to say, you're right, because he was. And so I said, I'm sorry, paper. And so now I have made this commitment to try as hard as I can to go paper. Actually, now we carry a bunch of the reusable
Mm-hmm.
bags in the car. And so, what does that mean for extracurriculars? The story is that from that point, I knew he had a really strong interest in environmental and conservation. And so, we began to find opportunities where he could dig deeper and be exposed to more. And over the past 4 years, we were able to do that. And so his major as of now, right? Because he's still young, even though he's going to graduate, is environmental science and sustainability. So we'll see, right? If he stays that way, as by the time he has to end of sophomore year, right, in college. But yeah, so that is just an example of we tailored opportunities to add to the academics that allowed him to dig deeper into his passions and his interests in that area.
Yeah, I want to double click on that a little bit
Yeah.
because in your individual consultation work,
Yes.
you work with all kinds of homeschooling families. Of course, you have this
Yes.
specialty from your own personal experience with homeschoolers, but with military homeschoolers, but you work with
Yes.
non-military homeschooling
Oh yeah.
families as well.
Yes. Hmm.
But I think particularly for military homeschooling families or families that have similar situations where they may be moving around a lot or they
Yeah.
may be in locations like outside of the US, for
Hmm.
example, where
Hmm.
there might not be access to a lot of extracurriculars, traditional extracurriculars that we would have.
Hmm.
How do you suggest families look at creating extracurricular opportunities or pursuing passion projects when it may not be so easy to do,
Yeah.
either because of geography or,
Mhm.
lack of opportunities near them?
Right. That's a good question. And as you know, military, right, overseas, we lived overseas. I'll give an example. For one, there are lots of opportunities for American military on installations, a lot of extracurricular opportunities, the traditional ones, I would say the sports, um, from, scouts and all. And so there exists a lot. I know though not every military family is stationed near an installation. Some are in
Mm,
remote spots. And then we have
yeah.
those who are on the mission field, right, that are not military affiliated. And we have those who are the foreign diplomats and the State Department and all, and they aren't on an installation typically, right? And so how do you find that? I have been able to see, at least with our experience most recently, well, several years ago, but the most recent of living overseas was we were able to plug into the culture and the country that we actually lived in. So
Mm,
our oldest son he became an Eagle Scout while we were in Naples, Italy. And one of the things that he became passionate about was the ancient ruins. And he was discovered that someone had found some ancient ruins on the installation. And they hadn't had done a whole lot of like featuring it and discussing it and helping people understand the significance of these ruins on this installation. And so his project was doing like a documentary. He had someone video and just walk through that whole process. So what happened with that? So that's on the installation, right? We get it,
mm,
scouts. But outside of the installation in a nearby town, there was a like an archaeological museum. So we were able to get him connected there so that some of these artifacts and different things could be featured there. So it was really a cool opportunity. Now, I know people are thinking, well, I don't speak the language and all. And so you'd be amazed though, right? How many people actually do speak English outside of the United States. I know a lot of times in the US, we may not know a lot of other languages, right? But outside of the US, many people speak English very well. And so we didn't experience too much of a problem with that. Likewise with soccer, with our youngest daughter, who we were able to join Italian soccer team.
Mm,
And, a few words, of course, had to learn, the language a little bit to be able to. But I mean, once you get them, there's only a few things they're saying out there on the field, right? And so it was an opportunity. It is more challenging. I will acknowledge that. And then also, not to plug in virtual because I feel like I know people were thinking, oh gosh, we want to get off the Zooms and the virtuals and all. But there's now, for example, speech and debate opportunities that exist online. There's lots of ways to get plugged in. It just takes concerted effort to really figure out what's going to work best for you. And the beauty of being an American military homeschooler on an installation is there's typically a fairly large community
mm,
of families that are doing similarly and can give you some support and resources to help.
that's great. So, Natalie, being a homeschool mom for so many years, I'd love to know what you've seen in terms of trends or sort of the evolution of homeschooling over that period of time. Clearly, many families have come to homeschooling and similar alternatives to conventional schooling since 2020
Mhm.
and COVID and the wake of the pandemic.
Mhm.
I know that the research that, again, Professor Watson at Johns Hopkins University has done has found that military homeschooling families were sort of less impacted in terms of numbers from COVID homeschooling because your numbers were already so high.
Yeah.
At least not as impacted in terms of the growth we've seen outside of military families since then. But I'd love to just hear what you've seen, or have you tell us what you've seen
Yeah.
over, say, the last couple of decades in
Yeah.
terms of numbers, reasons. What are some of those trends?
Yes, this is fascinating to me, and I know it is to you because I know the work that you do in this space. And I was recently on a School Choice Awareness Foundation a podcast and talking a little bit about like what are we seeing, and I think
Yeah,
we're all seeing pretty much the same thing. We're seeing families who are dissatisfied with traditional brick and mortar, and they're looking for options, right? And it's amazing the diversity of options that exist now that did not exist when I started back in 2001. Matter of fact, did not exist, I guess, maybe just 1 or 2 years before COVID, to be honest.
mm,
I mean, obviously some of these have existed along, but the momentum that we are seeing that is driving families to turn away from traditional and look for options to fit. And some of them are actually doing like hybrids. Some of them, and I mean, not necessarily just hybrid in the true sense of like online and in-person types of things, that too, but hybrid meaning like their families, they still have someone that's in a traditional brick and mortar and they're homeschooling somebody else for different reasons, right? So we're seeing that. We're seeing the evolution of the pods, which came about during COVID. And I think
yeah,
those have continued. Micro schools have flourished. There's debates in the homeschool community about, from the traditional homeschoolers, of which I'm a part of. It's like, oh, well, that's not homeschooling. And so
mm,
I think, we're figuring it out. We're figuring out um, like to focus more so, I think, on what's best for the child and for that family
mhm.
than necessarily that it has to look this way. I think we all thrive as a community of educators and families with children. We all thrive better when we figure out how we can kind of make it work and get along, if that makes sense. And
Yeah,
um that's not saying anything against the traditional homeschoolers because again, like I said, I'm in that community, right? We traditionally are homeschooling and knew once we started we were going to continue. But I also again always go back to personally, this is me, not representing MHA or HSLD or anything personally. This is my opinion is I want to meet the family where they are and come alongside what their choice is and help them look at the options to figure it out. There is concern though. There is
yeah,
concern on both ends. It's like, what does this look like for the future of homeschooling? in a traditional sense. And, we have ESAs and those things that are becoming, and we're seeing more legislation trying to limit homeschooling freedom. And I'm totally not happy about that. Because if our children want to homeschool, I would love for them, for our grandchildren, if we ever have any, to be able to be homeschooled with freedom to do so. So this is a discussion that is um, has so many like pivots to it, right? And so many possibilities. And I have seen just amazing growth in families
Yeah,
that are choosing to homeschool, and now it's part of the national discourse, right? It's
right.
like let's have these discussions nationally about the rise in homeschooling in the Black community and the Hispanic community, and now the military community. It's like what's going on, what's happening for with education in this country, and not only this country. I think we're seeing it around the world, that families are like, oh, let me look at this homeschooling thing because we aren't quite satisfied with what traditionally has worked for us. So yeah, it's
It
been
it seems,
interesting.
yeah, it seems to me, Natalie, that there's so much more parent empowerment,
Yes,
certainly over the last few years, whether
yes.
a family is choosing traditional
Mhm.
homeschooling or a
Right,
micro school or a
right.
low-cost private school or a traditional private school, a
Yes,
virtual school.
yes,
Are you seeing that too? Just
yes,
that parents are
yes,
are feeling empowered to be
yes.
much more involved?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
And I think I think we have always wanted parents to be involved. I think that um, I think that for reasons, that I had no control over, but looking back, I would imagine and setting up, traditional public school, because of the numbers of children, I would imagine it's really hard to specifically tailor a lot of diversity to meet different needs, right? I can
yeah,
imagine numbers wise, right? It's just difficult to have variation, right?
right.
And so I think with that, families have really kind of over the years trusted that decisions that were being made for their children were going to be made in their best interest, and that the school could, uniquely meet each child's needs without parents really looking at, is that really feasible? Is that really what's happening? And how can that happen with the numbers of kids in a classroom and per one teacher? And so it's really a system that I think, and this is to say, I should pause and say, I know there's some incredible principals. Our oldest daughter, the one who ended up taking the Russian and then she became fluent in Chinese, that's a whole nother story. She's an IB coordinator for DC public schools. And so I know her
Mhm.
heart. I know that there are some teachers who pour their whole spirit and soul into making a difference. So I'm not against them as much as I just feel like, wow, how was that ever going to really work in the long run? And so empowering parents to know that there are other options. You don't have to just choose how you were schooled,
Yeah,
you know? Parents will say, oh, well, I was schooled this way and it was good for me and I came out okay. Well, no one's really going to question that. Maybe you could have come out even better. I don't know, you don't know, right? But now you have an option,
yeah,
and that's what I really think is significant, is that parents have an option, empower the parents to trust that these are your children, right? And you have the option to figure out what's going to work for them, and just giving them the information so that they can look at the options with clarity, um, and also know that they can pivot.
yeah.
And they're not stuck with, oh, you can pivot, right? Now, I don't remember flip-flopping throughout a year because then that has its own issues, right, for the children. But you can pivot. So let's try something else if this isn't working. And my heart hurts a lot when I hear parents say, oh, my child is really not working for them and they really are suffering and they're begging me to homeschool them. I hear that all the time, or I know my child would be better off if I homeschool, but I can't do it. I don't have the patience and I don't know anything about it. Well, I want to help them answer those questions. One is not anything, has nothing to do with patience. It's all about figuring out that if your child needs something different, you, the parent, it's your responsibility. And to feel comfortable, empowered, that someone's going to walk alongside you and help you figure it out from that point. So,
Oh, I love that. So,
yeah.
as we begin to wrap up this
Yes.
spring, when your youngest graduates from homeschool high school, you will have successfully sent off your five children from
Yeah.
homeschooling. Reflecting back on your experience as a homeschooling parent, what did you find most rewarding, most fulfilling that you'd want other maybe new homeschooling parents to take away from?
Well, first, I would say the family bonding. Yeah. We're able to, spend a lot of time together, getting to know each other, and the ability to say, "This is who I see you are. I see these interests and passions. Let's figure out how we can make those how I, as a parent and my husband as well, come alongside and, support where you want to go and just kind of empowering the children to be confident about who they are and what they like and don't like and how to advocate for themselves as they become an adult. I think that homeschooling has allowed that. And so when I reflect back, I think, wow, this has been an amazing journey. Um, and if it hadn't been, gosh, I could not be as passionate as I am about it. And if we hadn't had such a great experience with it, I wouldn't be able to speak, with authenticity to say, you can do this. And so my tagline is, let's get it done, because we can, let's get it done. And so just helping families, meeting the family where they are and empowering them is something that I hold deeply. So,
I love that. So, if listeners and viewers want to learn more about the Military Homeschoolers Association or connect with you for some individual consulting around their
yeah,
homeschooling journey,
sure.
what is the best way for them to do that?
Well, if you want to reach me, my email for the Military Homeschoolers Association is info, at military homeschoolers, that's ERS.org. So you can reach me via that email. The website you had mentioned, militaryhomeschoolers.org. Um, if you're military homeschool, we have a free PCS homeschool checklist there. So we have an amazing board. We're creating resources that are going to be phenomenal. So I'm so excited about their passions. I want to shout them out. So look for that because we got a lot. We're on Facebook as Military Homeschoolers Association. What else? And if you want to reach me for consultations, then you can reach out to me at hello at Natalie hyphen mack.com. You can reach me and I'll, respond as quickly as I can. Yeah.
Well, I love all the encouragement you've provided folks today, and I especially love the wonderful resources that you're producing at
Thank
the
you.
Military Homeschoolers Association. Definitely recommend listeners and viewers check out that annual report. Hopefully, there'll be more
Yeah.
survey data coming
Yes,
out in
there
the
will be more.
future, many more resources for families, researchers, advocates of homeschooling, and so forth. So, Natalie Mack, thank you so much for all the work you do
Thank
and for
you. Thank
being
you.
on the Liberated podcast.
Thank you so much, Kerry.